and I think you can agree that he did a very good job. So cheers to Steve Rogers, and cheers everybody who's at the Jolly Heretic. Cheers, cheers, happy Monday, and cheers, Skol, Hurligan Goligan, Prost, K-Piss, and whatever. Cheers. Excellent. Oh, that's always nice. If you haven't got a London Pride, I do suggest you avail yourself of it. I'm a bit ruddy-cheeked, I notice. I've just been for a walk in the old freezing cold. But apparently spring is going to come here to northern Finland next week. It's going to be 7 degrees, so it's going to be fantastically hot. So that should be an interesting experience, and perhaps all the snow will finally melt, and we'll have some flowers and whatever. I don't think so, but that's pretty much the situation. Well, I have to say, there's not been that much. It's not the booze, shad bat. I haven't had anything to drink for at least 2 days. It's not the booze. It's I don't know. It's coming back in from the cold. It's something like that. But anyways, Prost, Phidias, and I can't read that. And cheers, everybody. Cheers. As I said, there hasn't been anything particularly conspicuous or shocking in the news. And I know that I do have a lot of questions from you, and so I'm going to move straight on to those. But if you're new to the Jolly Heretic, then of course, if you want to help the channel, then please subscribe. It helps us violently if you do that. Hit that bell button thing. Subscribe on BitChute and Odyssey. Remember, I will take this down immediately upon it finishing and upload it to BitChute and Odyssey. And if you want to send in super chats, you can do so through the old YouTube, or you can do so through BitChute on the link below. BitChute through Entropy. And I, of course, prefer them through Entropy because Entropy are nice people and are on the side of goodness and truth. And I will research the questions and hope to get back a reasonable answer. Sturgeon not guilty, says Laura Pendosa. That is true. So one group, apparently, I don't know if for our American viewers, there's allegations that the First Minister of Scotland, the devolved Scotland, is corrupt and attempted to have her former boss, basically Alex Salmond, the former First Minister of Scotland, framed. And apparently the Scottish cheers watching YouTube. Apparently the Scottish Parliament are going to find her guilty, but some Queen's Counsel, some senior lawyer, found her not guilty. So, so we're not sure what's going on there. All right, now look, here's the thing. I'm going to turn to the old questions. And one question we had was from Carrot on the Moon. And he says, do you think, £10, thank you very much, sir. And he says, do you think in this round of civilization, we may fully adapt to urbanism? Will any of these adaptations persist to the following civilization? Are we more adapted to it than last time? It's a very good question. I don't think so, because urbanism only seems to manifest once civilizational declension pretty much is already built into the system, and once it already starts happening. So we only seem to get to urbanism, to full-on urbanism, once evolutionary pressures are low. Were we to get to urbanism with evolutionary pressures already being high, then perhaps there would be some sort of significant adaptation to urbanism, but it isn't. We only turn to significant percentages of the population living in urban environments after about 1800, and by this time it's becoming warmer. We're 100 years or so after the Maunder minimum. It's getting warmer and warmer and warmer. Selection pressures are made weaker and weaker and weaker. They're then made even weaker by the adoption of urbanism, because that goes in tandem with, of course, the Industrial Revolution and medicine and better public health and better living conditions and all of this sort of thing. And so the result of that is that there's massively weakened selection pressure. We know we were under selection pressure for intelligence. We were under selection pressure for religiousness. We know that both low intelligence and low religiousness go together with mutational load and go together with congenital disease. And these things just increase. And so the only way we could have significant pressure for urbanism would be for urbanism to develop while there was still very, very strong Darwinian selection pressures. And that simply isn't the case. Were that the case, then of course you would be more exposed in an urban environment normally to disease. You'd be more likely to catch diseases, that sort of thing. And so urbanism would presumably select in favor of a better immune system. Thank you, Edward Y. And things of that kind. Urbanism would also perhaps select in favor of being more pro-social and better to get on with people because it's crowded. And it's been suggested that there is some degree to which that might have been the case. And it explains why Indians, people in South Asia seem to have oddly high conscientiousness, considering how are selected they otherwise are compared to Europeans. They seem to have significantly higher conscientiousness, and it's been submitted that this might have something to do with being adapted to very, very crowded environments. So you would expect some sort of adaptation in that way, and therefore you would expect more of an adaptation to being able to cope with people who were genetically dissimilar to you and not experiencing a sense of dysphoria, whatever, and breakdown and mental illness and so on in that context. Now, as far as I can see, it's unlikely that we have adapted significantly to urbanism because, as I say, A, there hasn't been that much time. I mean, the population hasn't been substantially urban in Western countries for very long. And B, to the extent that it has been urban, it's been under these weakening and weakening and weakening conditions such that we're not really selecting to anything. I don't think the suicide rate or whatever among people that can't stand urbanism is sufficient to warrant being called a selection pressure of any significant kind to go change the genome. So no, I don't think we are going to be more selected to urbanism this time in particular. Steve Rogers, thank you, sir, $10, says, if we lived on a planet with extraterrestrials over tens of thousands of years under Darwinian conditions, how would we evolve to interact with people to whom we are 0% genetically related? That's a very good question. I suspect that it would bring us back to this paradox of civilization that you have in interactions in multicultural societies. And so on the one, and indeed Frank Salter looks at this, that on the one hand, you are evolved to cooperate with people that are genetically highly similar to you. So in terms of indirectly passing on your genes, in terms of the good of your group, the good of your extended genetic interests. But on the other hand, part of the way that you are evolved to want to get on as an individual, and to get on and to want other things and whatever, and so you end up with a trade-off. So on the one hand, you should sexually select, let's say, for people that are genetically very, very similar to you, and in particular, you would want that sweet spot of about third cousin. But on the other hand, you are selected as a man, let's say, to sexually select for good genes, to sexually select for signs of beauty, to sexually select for signs of youth. So you have these different things that are pulling you in different directions. And what some people will do is they will trade genetic similarity for beauty, for youth. And therefore, marry a foreigner, let's say. What other people will do is they will make the trade the other way around. If genetic similarity is more important to them, for example, if they are slow life history strategists, you can see this in people who are friends. You have, on average, people who are best friends and cooperate strongly with each other are genetically more similar to each other than is the case by chance. But people have friends who are of different races. People have really friends, if you think about it. I mean, people are very close to their dogs. People have members of their family who are a different species, who they would mourn more if their dog died than if their cousin died, because they strongly bond with them. They are trading genetic similarity for other things that are useful, such as that we also want in people, such as protection, such as solidarity, such as love, such as whatever it happens to be. Now, we do this with animals. I mean, as a rule, we operate in terms of a series of concentric circles that move outwards from ourselves. We love ourselves more than our immediate family. We love our immediate family more than our extended family. We love our extended family more than our friends, and so on. But there are all kinds of things that bisect that, such as perceiving an adopted person or even a dog as a member of your own family, because you bond with them very strongly, because you go through adversity with them, because you spend time with them, or because there's some co-evolutionary use to you getting on with each other, as has been the case. Now, I suspect that even though we would be, I don't know how different we'd be from aliens, but we would be presumably totally different from these aliens. Presumably we would bond with them in much the same way that we bond with animals. Animals are very, very genetically different from us. I mean, our common ancestor with a dog or a cat, you've got to go back to the vole to have a common ancestor. It's like 80 million years ago to have a common ancestor with a dog or a cat. But look how strongly we bond with them and love them and whatever, and perhaps with the dogs anyway, it works the same the other way around. So I think that something like that would occur. It is within us to be able to make, if you're sufficiently cage-strategist anyway, to be able to make alliances with people who are genetically dissimilar to you, very dissimilar to you, if it's in your interest to do so. And those alliances will be stronger the more you've got to bond with them and whatever. And so I suspect that this is why we can make bonds with people that are from very, very different races, very close bonds with them. If there's some genetic trade-off involved, if there's some useful trade-off involved, then we can make bonds with different species. So I think that something like that probably could happen. Okay, thank you, sir. The next question comes from Sensational Seller, thank you, 499, thank you. And he says, you've often said that the left are individualist, but the right are collectivist. Usually I hear it's the other way around. Can you explain the disparity? Yeah, I can see why you think that. And I can see why it's a little bit confusing. But basically, we have 5 moral foundations, according to Jonathan Haidt. These 5 moral foundations are obedience to authority, in-group loyalty, and sanctity versus disgust. These are the so-called binding foundations. And then you have equality and harm avoidance. These are the so-called individualistic foundations. We have these 2 sets of foundations because on the one hand, we are a pack animal. And therefore, we have to be able to be highly pack-oriented and highly group-oriented, and we have to have, therefore, to varying degrees, these binding foundations that bind us together, where you put the group ahead of the self, i.e. obedience to authority, i.e. in-group loyalty, and sanctity and things like that. But on the other hand, we have to be able to ascend as far as we can to the top of the group, particularly if we're male, in order to pass on our genes. And so you have these individualistic foundations where you're selfish, basically, and you're concerned with the good of yourself. The good of yourself and wanting power for yourself. And therefore, you're concerned with harm avoidance. That's about harm to you, to others as well, but it affects you. And also equality. If you're in the middle of the group or the bottom of the group, you don't have power, then you're going to want equality so that you get a bigger bite of the cake. So that's therefore a selfish thing. It's about you. And so you get these 2 sets of foundations, and you get individual variation in how strongly people are inclined towards either the binding foundations or the individualistic foundations. Both are perfectly adaptive. And often you get people in the middle of society. Protestants in the 16th century would be an example. Christians in the early church would be an example. They're in the middle of society. And so how do they get to the top? Well, they don't have power or anything. So what they do is they signal. They're individualistic. That's their method to get to the top. They're out for themselves. They're not at the top. They need to get to the top. So either you signal your group orientation, and you signal how brave you are, how courageous you are, how holy you are, whatever. That's one thing you can do. But also you signal your individualistic values. You signal how in favour of equality you are, or how in favour of harm avoidance you are. And that's what you'll find these people will do. And therefore they will get to the top of society. And once they're at the top of society, they will have no longer a particularly substantial need to do that. And you see this again and again. People that are in the middle of society will signal their morality. They will strongly signal their morality as a way of getting to the top. And one of the things that you can do, particularly if you're disempowered or whatever, is you can signal how kind you are, how moral you are, how good you are. So that's how these things work. And it's been shown that people that do signal that are virtue signalers. They are high in Machiavellianism and narcissism. Because, of course, it's the people, the normal people, they don't go around signaling things to any overt extent. People that do signal things do so for a reason. And the reason is they want power and they want admiration. And they know that if they signal these things, then they'll get power and they'll get admiration. So they signal these things. So therefore, ironically, the people that go on the most about being the kindest, about being the loveliest, about being the most group-oriented, about being the most concerned for the group, aren't really at all. They're not. They're the most concerned for themselves. They're individualists. And that's why they signal these individualistic values. And now the thing is, the problem with these sets of foundations is that it's been found that people that are right wing, that are basically group oriented, they are about equal on all of the foundations, whereas people that are individualists, who are left wing, they tend to be low on the binding foundations and very high on the individualizing foundations. And so therefore those people cannot empathize with the right wing, but the right wing can, the group oriented type people, they can empathize with the individualistic people. And so the individualistic selfish people who are concerned about harm avoidance and who are to themselves and who are concerned about equality for themselves will signal how in favor of equality they are for everybody, because we all perceive to some extent equality to be a moral good, because that's what they're into. That's what they think is important, and they'll go on and on about it, and they'll signal how important harm avoidance is. Really, it's harm avoidance themselves they care about, but they'll signal it's for other people, so it seems like they're community-oriented. They're not really community-oriented. Community-oriented people would give up their lives for the society, and therefore they will make their way to the top, and they will push the society in an increasingly left-wing direction, because the right, who can empathise with them asymmetrically, will always give ground to them. And so eventually, always, things become more and more and more left-wing, until more and more individualist, until there is a pushback, until, for example, it's realised that if we carry on like this, we're going to be so disunited, we're going to be invaded. So in the context of no group selection, it's not complex, Artisan Farmer. It's very, very simple. Individualistic people have individualistic values. They signal the strength they feel of those individualistic values. This makes people morally sympathize with them, and this means they can leverage for power. Individualistic values correlate with being left-wing. People who are left-wing tend to be more into these individualistic values, harm avoidance and equality. They may dress them up as being about the good of society. Of course they do. Everything's all about good of society. All things about the good of society. But ultimately, it's been found they're not motivated by the good of society. They're selfish, and they're motivated by the good of themselves. And consistent with that, the people that are the most inclined to advocate these values, hold these values, and espouse these values are Machiavellians and narcissists, i.e. extreme individualists. That's what left-wing people are. They're selfish. They're extreme individualistic people. Okay, I hope that makes the distinction clear, sir. Okay, the next question comes from Tyler W. Thank you, sir. Here's $5. I've noticed a higher frequency of thin skin under the eyes, angular features, and Roman noses among the British. Any insight? Not really. All I've noticed, if you're American, sir, is that Americans seem to have these various ideas about the British, such as that the British have bad teeth, such as that the British have big noses, and you see these stereotypes about the British displayed on things like The Simpsons, and I must say I'm not really very familiar with them. Europeans describes Ed, says Visigoth, right? I'm not really very familiar with them among the Europeans, and no, so I'm not aware that these minor details existed. Moreover, in that most Americans are, or not most Americans, but the cultural core of Americans are basically British, then you would expect also to notice these things among the British, and particularly among people in Utah, because the people in Utah are overwhelmingly genetically British. And if you don't notice these, and quite recently so, I mean, as recently as the 1850s or late 1840s, they migrated from Britain to Utah. In huge numbers, and so if you don't notice them among the people of Utah, then they're probably not true of the people of Britain to any significant degree. So no, I'm not sure about that, and I haven't noticed it. No. Okay, the next question comes from White is the New Green, £5. Thank you, sir. And he says the vigil for Sarah was the whitest thing I've seen. This is Sarah Everard, who we discussed last week. Since the Don't Look Back in Anger vigil in Manchester in 2017. Well, yeah, this is to be expected. I said that I felt that the reaction to her death was so strong because she was the kind of person that's involved in wokeness, the kind of person that's heavily involved in the media, an upper middle class white woman that has been to some extent inculcated with these left-wing values. I think that's someone got very offended on a blot or whatever it's called that I was at recently where I said this. But I think that's true. She was unmarried at 33, which would be predicted by having absorbed left-wing values. She was childless at 33. She was living in, whatever, and she was wandering around Clapham Common late at night in the dark. So, or not late at night, but in the dark anyway. So you can see that she's one of them, and that's why people would empathise with her. And inherently, you're going to sympathise with her. You're going to expect people to sympathise more with people that are like them. And so if it was white people that were killed disproportionately at this concert in Manchester, then obviously it's going to be more white people that are interested. And that's probably what we saw. And if it was a white girl that has been killed like that, then obviously it's going to be white middle class people like her, people who are genetically similar to her, people whose daughter or whose friend or who it could have been, who are going to feel something about that because it's them, it's their genetic interests, if you like, that's been damaged. And also, to the extent that this ideology of multiculturalism and feminism and whatever crosses over with social class and intelligence, which it does, then it's their worldview of equality and whatever that is shaken, and it's them that is perhaps in some cases that you feel good if you virtue signal. It makes you feel good to do it. It makes you feel good to be morally self-righteous and feel that you're better than others. And one motivation for turning out something like that is display. Is to be seen to be there, is bragging rights, is to be able to say that you're there. No visual from Mrs. Cox from Exeter, precisely. Why do you think it says Gavloft? Exactly. I noticed that as well. This girl's gone missing in Exeter, nothing, because she's not upper middle class. So, and who cares? That's exactly. So it's awful, isn't it? I noticed that immediately the other day. Exactly right. Nothing. Bugger all. Because the kind of people in the media that are able to organise things like this are people like this girl, this Sarah Everard. So yes, don't forget to smash that like button, says Durka Martina. That's indeed correct. Yes, Dankelvale. Yes, please smash that like button. And let's try and get up to 1,000. What's going on here? Is something on at the same time? I noticed in the interview I did with Tom Sunik, I admit that he did seem to kind of jabber on a bit, but I had fewer than usual watching. I put that down to the football game, but let's try and get some more people on here. Okay, the next question comes from yes, My World, $5. Thank you, sir. And he says, is the Nietzschean overman related to your concept of the genius in some way? Yeah, perhaps to some extent. I mean, it's not my concept of the genius. The idea of the genius is that the evidence is that the genius is a combination of these certain traits which make them completely brilliant. And one of these traits is that in terms of the scientific genius is that they have outlier time change meshing up the schedule. Yes, indeed. Why don't the Americans change their clocks at the same time we do, for flip's sake? They'd be very angry. Anyway, enough of that. What's the matter with you people? It's our fault, really. The Americans have already changed their clocks, so actually it's us that. Why don't we just stop changing our clocks? I mean, that's the solution. It's absolutely preposterous, this changing the clocks. Just stop changing our clocks. It's pointless. It just means that when it gets dark in Finland, when it gets really dark, they change the clocks. When it gets dark early, they change the clocks so it gets darker even earlier. And then when it gets light early, when it gets dark late in the summer, they change the clocks so it gets dark even later. Mentally ill. Anyway, so I'm sorry, I've lost my place. So yes, the answer to the question, I got rather emotional there. So yes, Nietzsche overman. Nietzsche genius is outlier high intelligence combined with moderately low conscientiousness, which means that you are not rule governed, and so you're able to think in quite a creative way and make sort of unusual connections and whatever. And low agreeableness, which means that you either don't care about offending people with your radical new idea, or you're too autistic to realise that you will offend people, like James Watson or somebody like that. Right? That's the genius. The Nietzschean overman, I get the impression, the Ubermensch, has aspects of that. However, he seems to be more sort of group selected, more a sort of cultural hero figure who will lead his people out of the rut that they are in into glory. And it may be that people who are those kinds of people do have some of these traits, but they also have empathy. So they understand how other people feel. And are able to inspire them because of the extent to which they understand how other people feel. So it's a little bit more like the charismatic. It's I mean, we do talk about this in the Genius Famine by myself and Bruce Charlton. You can talk about the population level genius like that, the political genius. He has aspects of the scientific genius, but he also has this higher empathy. Perhaps he has low agreeableness, perhaps doesn't care about people, but he understands people. He knows how they feel. He understands how they feel, and he can inspire them accordingly. And also, I think there's some evidence that that kind of genius is higher in mental instability. The scientific genius is not necessarily particularly high in mental instability, but the artistic genius is, and so is the political genius. They tend to be high in mental instability, and this means they feel negative feelings strongly, and they feel there's something very wrong with the world, and they want to correct it, and they have perhaps because they have a higher mental instability, they have religious experiences, and this gives them a sense of power and destiny and whatever. And so that would be Byronic hero, says Celia Artemis. Yeah. So I think that would be more. So it's a little bit different from the genius, or should I say it's a subsection of the genius. So I think that's perhaps how I would see the Übermensch. Okay, the next question comes from Clifford Professor Bates of Poland, and he says, "Hi Ed." Hello, Professor Bates. Ken's Lottie. Thank you very much, sir. And I hope all is well, and Dzień dobry and Yakshimash and all that. My World also says, thank you, sir, $5. He says, how is sub-Saharan Africa not a stable and harsh environment? Well, I can answer that one for you, sir. It's really perfectly simple. If you are in traditional sub-Saharan Africa, it is incredibly unharsh. It's incredibly easy because basic needs are met. It's basically summer or spring all year round. It's warm. You don't need to look for food. There's food wherever you want it. Okay, yeah, if you move to cities, which is a severe evolutionary mismatch for people like that, which has been developed by people that have come outside and colonized, well, then it might be harsh. Or even perhaps if you have farming, which has been brought in from people from outside that have colonized, then it might be harsh. But they haven't naturally developed farming so much. They've developed herding themselves. And this is basically, there's food whenever you want it. You don't have to really, there's no winter. You don't have to prepare for a time when there's no food. You don't have to prepare for a time when it's cold. You don't have to build houses. You don't have to make shelters. Your basic needs are met. There's food whenever you want it, wherever you want it. It's abundant, teeming with food. You're never going to starve. You're never going to have to plan for harshness. That's easy. That's not harsh. That's easy. And as for it being, it is unstable in the sense that you have all kinds of wild animals everywhere that are poisonous, and they can hurt you, and boom, that's it, dead, gone. You can be meandering along, easy, food on the trees, whatever, and then suddenly you're bitten by a tsetse fly or bitten by a malarial mosquito, and that's it, boom, dead. And it's not like that in Europe. It is harsh in that there are periods where there's literally no food, and you have to plan for those periods of harshness where there's no food, but it's stable in the sense that you don't have massive outbreaks of tropical diseases all the time and things like that. You have predictable seasons, you have predictability, so it's stable. It's stable, but it's harsh. So, that's the difference. Now, admittedly, Europe is more stable now in a lot of ways than it used to be. We used to have things like outbreaks of polio once a year or once every few years, outbreaks of cholera. They've all gone now. And so in a sense, we were in a more unstable ecology in some ways, but we were also in generally a harsher ecology because there was death and mortality salience all around and you had to survive it. And now those pressures have gone. So I think that we can say Africa it's easy. It's not harsh. It's easy. You don't have to worry about food, but you have sudden, unpredictable outbreaks of disease. Whereas in the West, you'd have outbreaks of disease, but they'd actually be quite predictable because they'd have clear causes. There's nothing you can do about it. There's just mosquitoes, nothing you can do. So that's the difference. Why do you not come and live in sub-Saharan Africa? You talk rubbish. I don't think it's rubbish. In the parts of sub-Saharan Africa that haven't been urbanized, that's what life is like, you should go to those parts of sub-Saharan Africa, and you would see that the people that are living in tribal areas of Ethiopia have no problem getting food, but they do have problems with things like malaria. This is just fact. Okay, the next question comes. I will be having an African on this program on Thursday, though, so I'll talk to him about it. Right, the next question comes from Gavloft, and he says, how does a based man survive the matriarchal workplace? The first thing I would suggest is that you change your job. The second thing I would suggest is that you realize what's going on, which is that you are in, as Sail Away has said, it is that your position is a Darwinian selection pressure. You have matriarchy happens in our strategy ecologies, in which women are very similar to men, in which women are loved and left and have to take on some of the male jobs, and therefore become more sort of similar to men physically and mentally, which is what's happened as we've deviated from the Darwinian selection pressure norm, and this is a Darwinian selection pressure. This is the equivalent of going out in the forest full of animals and managing to not be killed. This is the equivalent for our generation of going into battle at Agincourt. This is the selection pressure we are under, the extreme evolutionary mismatch of an all-female workplace, of soy boys, of left-wing policies, of black people in historical dramas that are meant to be about our history. Everything done to push us down and make us despondent and dysphoric and give up and not breathe and go mad and just forget it. That's it. That's the battle that we are in. That's our Agincourt. And will you be killed or will you get through? That's the question you have to ask yourself. And so if I was in your position, that is how I would cope. Mr. Dutton is on fire today, says Artesian Falmer. Right, okay. Not the end is nigh. No, the new future is nigh. Okay, the next question comes from PM, and he says, Canadian here. Since it's a Canadian invention, it's my duty to inform you that the mobile in snowmobile is pronounced as in automobile. Well, I never doubted that fact. So yes, a snowmobile, automobile. Yes, that's fair enough. Now, I know you pronounce it automobile, and snowmobile, but I don't. I was talking to Richard Spencer yesterday about this, and he pronounced it snowmobile. And I know also, I was watching this program today called it's a Canadian TV program on in Finland called something like Love It or Leave. It's about people selling their houses. It's rubbish. And do you know, every Canadian house has something called a mudroom. I mean, I don't know what it is. I imagine it's a room for keeping mud in. I keep my mud in the garden. But every Canadian house has a thing called a mudroom, and it's very, very important that you have to have a mudroom. So if you're Canadian, if we have any Canadians in the chat, if you could please tell me what on earth a mudroom is. I'm never really clear what a mudroom is or why any Canadian house would need one, but apparently they do. Okay, the next question comes from Gene Dirtal, and he says, Russians seem to have a similar inferiority complex to Finns about not being fully white. Met one said the majority are at least part Tatar. Thought is completely wrong. I don't know why they would think that. I know many, many Russians, and they regard themselves as completely white. They regard the Finns as less white than them, and they call them chukka or something. There's some word they use, chukka, dirty chukka. Forest people, I think. I know they are white. Russian people are white. They're Slavs, but they are white. There is a little tiny bit of intrusion into their genetics from Mongolian invaders and things like this. And it's been suggested there was I think he was Slovenian academic called, I can't remember what his name, but he argued there was like this line that goes across Russia and down through of Mongolian incursion into the gene pool, where the result is that people are very bad at dealing with alcohol because, of course, they're these people that used tea and things like this. And so they're not as developed at dealing with alcohol, and they become alcoholics. So there may be a little tiny bit of that. There is a little tiny bit of admixture in these populations, but I'm not aware that they have that inferiority complex about being not white in the way that the Finns do. With the Finns, they wrote in their own histories indicate that the Swedish speakers regarded them as non-white. The Nazis regarded them as non-white. The Swedish-speaking Finns as white, but the Finns is basically not white. My father was at school father-in-law was at school in the 50s, and he was taught in the 50s that Finns were not white. He was taught at school that they were sort of between white and mongoloid, and that they were like a yellow sort of people. That's what he was taught that at school. In the 50s, so that's how recent it is in the culture, and it's only more recently, since the war, really, that they've started to strongly promote this idea that the Finns are not white. Sorry, the Finns are white, and that they're old Europeans, and that they're as European as anybody else. It's only since they've started to be integrated into Europe that idea is promoted. When Finland was allying with the Soviet Union and whatever, there was a movement strongly within that promoted the Eastern dimension to Finnishness. When they wanted to break away from Russia and from Sweden, they emphasised their distinctiveness. So I'm not slip of the tongue, yes. So I'm not quite sure about that. I'm not aware that that's as strong in Russia. There are, of course, lots of ethnic groups within Russia that are not white. But I'm talking about, aren't the Finns Nordic, says Abdul Hassan. No, of course, absolutely not. No, they're not Nordic. No, they're not Aryan. They're Finno-Ugric. They're Finno-Ugric, along with the Hungarians, the Estonians, the Sami, and the various people, the Yakut, whatever, across the north of Russia. And those people have varying degrees of Asian, at least Asian admixture. And with the Finns, it's between about 5 and 10%. Thank you, Dawn Browning. So I can't answer that today. I'll have to research that. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so that's my thoughts on that. The next question comes from, I've got to hurry up. Comes from Philippou, and he says, what do you think about the police and crime bill? I think it's absolutely awful. We have this in the UK at the moment. It's just, it's obvious when they have something like this, whether it's 9/11, whether it's this, they use it as an attempt, the kind of people that get into positions of power, like having power, and they enjoy controlling people. And they will use this as a means when we are in a time of fear, when we're at our worst, when we're easy to manipulate, when we've got other things on our mind. That's when they bring in these policies to grab power, because that's the kind of people, let's face it, that get into positions of power, the kind of people that like power, Machiavellians. So I think it's a terrible, terrible idea, and nobody should vote in favour of it. And anyone that does vote in favour of it, there should be consequences. It's totally unacceptable, and there should be no such. These laws should not exist. It shouldn't be possible to pass a law that permits a lockdown. Ellen59 says, what are your thoughts on children and teens nowadays having such easy, unfettered 24/7 access to all manner of online porn on their services? Yeah, I was discussing this yesterday on another show that I was on. When we were kids, I'm 40 years old. When I was a teenager, no pornography at all. Pornography was something you had to buy off the top shelf. There was a lot of shame involved in doing so people didn't do so. And you might occasionally, the porn fairies might occasionally magically leave some porn behind some bushes or something like that, as happened on my route home from school in 1994 or 5. But otherwise, you didn't see nude images. You, of course, didn't see them on television, apart from in an arty context or something, in certain kinds of films very occasionally. I remember watching a film at the cinema called Splitting Airs with Catherine Zeta-Jones and Eric Idle, and there's a brief nude scene. I don't know whether it was Catherine Zeta-Jones herself that did it or a body double. You just see her briefly nude. Wow, it's such a rare thing to see. So obviously we're going to be adapted to an ecology over a very long period in civilization where we don't see nudity. We're not used to perceiving nudity, so it's not going to be good for us to have constant exposure to nudity. So that means that K strategists who are going to be highly environmentally sensitive are going to be messed up by this. Secondly, the presence of porn, including very, very realistic porn, if it's sufficient to sate, is going to satisfy these kinds of people. So it's going to reduce testosterone levels. They're potentially going to become addicted to it and find that they can't get it up to anything else. And so this is obviously going to be very, very bad for them. They're going to be masturbating more, which is going to reduce testosterone levels. I did a whole video, in fact, last week on why the testosterone levels are falling. It may be to do with estrogen in the water or whatever, but these factors are also likely to be relevant. We're not evolved to have access to all this pornography. We're not evolved for this it's an evolutionary mismatch, and we would expect it to mess up the development of sexuality, particularly if exposure occurs at a very young age. So yeah, I agree. Something should be done about it. The Koreans, the South Koreans, of course, have done something about it. They've completely banned it. It's almost impossible to get hold of pornography in South Korea. So there you go. All right, the next question comes from Clifford Bates, thank you, sir. And he says the Renaissance and the recovery, Greek and Roman rationalism hit Germany as the Reformation. Interesting point, sir. I'm not 100% sure about that. It strikes me that with the Black Death, you had a very, very massive selection event, and it would have strongly selected in favor of religiousness. And it would also strongly have selected in favor of high socioeconomic status, and thus in favor of K strategy and in favor of intelligence. And what this would manifest it as is, on the one hand, the Renaissance, which was an expression of, I think, of increased intelligence, but on the other hand, as a religious revival, which was an expression of increased religiousness. You may be right that there was a sort of rationalism to the Reformation, in that you had certain dogmas that you and then you kind of autistically and rationally developed them from there. And there was an individualism involved, in so much as you're questioning the dominant ideas of the group, and this could be seen to be an intelligent thing to do. And so you could be right that there is an aspect of the Reformation is increased intelligence, or indeed the Proto-Reformation is increased intelligence, because you're questioning things. That's an intelligent thing to do. You're going back to sources and reasoning from them. That's an intelligent thing to do. You're desiring a completely logical worldview, that, as opposed to something inconsistent, that's based within the dogmas, is an intelligent thing to want. So you could be right that the Renaissance and the Reformation are interrelated, and they are an expression of the same sort of thing. So yeah, I would agree with that. And interestingly, I note that in Finland you had something similar. So in about 1698, 30% of the Finnish population were killed in a massive famine. What was the result? Within 100 years, you had a Finnish Renaissance, what they call their national awakening. This was this intellectual sort of romantic sort of movement. And on the other hand, really a kind of Finnish Reformation. You have the huge rise of these Finnish awakening movements, like Lestadianism and the what was the other one called? Paavo Ruotsalainen, or whatever his name was. So yeah, these fundamentalist, very, very religious groups, and they come about at the same time. So what about economic causes? You know, if people were subject to stress, that would elevate religiousness. That's the point. That would have been one of the reasons why, with the Reformation, there'd just been famines prior to that. So that might also have explained where the Reformation happened when it did, but then it kept going. And if anything, it got more severe. You start hanging witches and things like that. I think people were becoming more religious. Same as the Black Death. No, with the Black Death, it got a little bit warmer actually after. So I'm not sure about that. Okay, the next question comes from yes, David Gagnon, and he says the word is perineum, not taint. No, the word is the Baffin Bridge, or the Humber Bridge. There's all kinds of words for it, sir. Thank you for your donation. Next question comes from TL. He says, "What are you doing to prepare your children for the collapse of civilization?" I am telling them why it is happening. And I am telling them that they have to look out for their third cousins. Okay, Jason Smith says, it won't let me send a $20 super chat with words like IQ and Arab. Anybody else having this problem? Hal 9000 says IQ and £5, and it comes through. Andre says Arab IQ, $2, and it comes through. Judge Holden says Christians like to watch. Thank you, sir. Elder Millennial says Western Rite Orthodoxy must replace modernist Rome. I agree with you. I concur. I think the only place that hasn't become the only Christian church that's going at the moment that hasn't become completely paused is Orthodoxy. The only place that's stuck to its guns, the only place where they don't bother about theology and all these kinds of stupid things, and they're there to be the same and to be the same forever. They're really a kind of pagan cult. And the problem with trying to reinvent paganism is that it's lost its religious fervor. And once something has been mocked monks and debased and whatever. Thank you, Max Troy. It's very, very difficult for it to become holy again. And this is one of the things which people like René Guénon argued with regard to, he said, well, we need a religion in the West and we should adopt Islam, he said, because he said Islam still has some sort of power to it, still has some holiness to it, whereas Christianity has been mocked and debased and joked about, and it's just lost its holiness, and it doesn't mean anything to people anymore, and so it's no good. Whereas these things in the East, because they're different and they have an element of mystery to them, and therefore they have the potential to be the religion. I'm not sure he's right about that, because I think there's something very alien to the West about Islam. It's something that we've always seen as oppositional to Western civilization, and for that matter, Buddhism and Hinduism. Whereas with something like traditional paganism, it's been mocked. We associate it with children's stories and fairy tales and things. So it's very difficult to revive something. That's where it was kept alive. So it's very, with wizards and whatever. It's very difficult to revive something like that. But what you do have, I think, in orthodoxy is the best of both worlds, because you have Christianity, and there's still a degree to which we have a sort of emotional religious attachment to sort of Christianity to some extent. But because it's alien to Western people, and it's foreign, and it's mysterious, and it's Eastern. Remember, part of the attraction originally of Christianity was almost certainly this attraction of things that are from the East. There's this worship of the East in Western culture as mysterious and different. Worship of the East, perhaps also of the North. This idea of the North as a bit mysterious and a bit weird. And the idea that hell is down yet north, and that the devil lives in the North, and that mysterious things come from the North. And that perhaps is the attraction to Norse paganism among European people. And also this things from the East. The land of the rising sun, and so I think that might be true, and so I think therefore that where orthodoxy may have the right sort of balance, and it smells nice as well. And we know we had my friend Robin Riley on here the other week, and she's converted to orthodoxy, and I can see the attraction. Okay, the next question comes from Colonel Boyle. He says, "Can't say black intelligent quotient. Well, try and stop me next week. Thank you, sir. Oh, Thursday, sorry." Hal 9000 says, "Yeah, he's right. That word combo is banned for super chats." David Gagnon says, "But what if white people have evolved to be individualistic, and that's a problem? What can be done about that? We are evolved that way." Very good point. I look at this in my book, Race Differences and Ethnocentrism, sir, and I argue that there are that you have a number of ways of evolving. One is to be totally individualistic and whatever. Another is to be totally group-oriented, like with Japanese, Chinese, highly group-oriented. And what we have is a situation, what I call the genius strategy, where we're not particularly group-oriented. We're optimally not group-oriented. And this allows us to throw up these geniuses, because it means that we are tolerant to some extent of non-cooperators. And these people come up with brilliant ideas which allow the group to dominate over even groups that are more group-oriented than us, because we have a better technology and the inventions of the genius. And this allows us to trade and grow and come up with more geniuses, because we have a slightly bigger gene pool than the people that are highly group oriented have. But we have a smaller, but we are more intelligent and more able to come up with geniuses than the people that are sort of less so, and so need to practice cousin marriage and stuff to hold themselves together. So we sit in the middle of those two extremes with this very, very successful strategy. And that strategy is fine as long as religiousness doesn't drop too low, because if that drops too low, ethnocentrism drops too low, and if that drops too low, then you've no longer got anything that is upholding group-oriented values at all, and then you simply become highly individualistic, and you get runaway individualism, as we see, and you get overwhelmed by more group-oriented sort of people, as is happening. And that happened because mortality salience dropped too low, basically, and so and also selection pressure dropped too low, meaning more individualists who were too individualistic, so we weren't group-oriented enough, and so our strategy stopped being adaptive. And I think that what's going to happen is that that's going to change. I think that we will survive this, because the research I'm doing at the moment with my squire indicates that what's basically happening is that these people that are individualistic are being selected out. And so the nature of Europeans will change, and we will simply become more group-oriented. If you can't beat them, join them. That's what's going to happen. That's the response. That's how we all survive. Okay, the next question comes, but as I say, that is for next year when that book comes out, which will be jolly interesting when it does. Right, the next question comes from Andre, and he says, my IQ isn't just sub 100, it's sub-Saharan. Okay, thank you, sir. Bulskani Ratnik did that one. Sunik did that one. Jason Smith. Jason Smith's question. Please answer this question, he says in his link. And the question was, has there been research on whether different... let me just find this question, sorry. Sorry, chaps. Oh, bloody hell. Come on! Click! Right, yes. Okay, right. Yes, so the question is... Oh, come on! Right, from Jason Smith, £20. Are there any studies on the relationship between European DNA and IQ or socioeconomic status in the Arab world? Descendants of European slaves performing better than native Arabs would quite definitely disprove wokeism. The answer is no. I have not been able to. Well, not on IQ. I did look into this. There is variation in the extent of white genes within the Arab world. So the lowest level is among once you get to Saudi Arabia, places like that, and they have at most about 4% white admixture. And then the highest is in Lebanon and places like in the Levant, basically, but particularly the Levant, where it's up to 17% white admixture. Among those people, there's no data on the IQ differences within the different ethnicities within the Arab world, only between the Arabs and the Bedouin. Of course, the Bedouin IQ is very, very low. But what is the case is that the Christians in these countries are more genetically European. The Copts are more genetically European. And until very recently, they are hugely overrepresented in the elites of these Levantine countries. In Tunisia, they practically ran Tunisia till recently. Even in Iraq, the Christians, Tariq Aziz was Christian. That they were overrepresented in the elite. And so what this would imply is that, the Christians who are more genetically white they're certainly lighter, are more intelligent than the Arabs, Now, what's the reason for that? I don't know. Part of it would be that if they were richer, then they would be more inclined to stay Christian, not pay the tax. Pay the tax, and therefore it would select out the stupid ones, and the stupid ones would convert, possibly. But certainly that there is a little bit of evidence in that regard. Perhaps Ed's inaugural Odyssey stream. I don't know where I'm doing an inaugural Odyssey stream. I do have all of my stuff on Odyssey. Now, anyway, the next question comes from, speaking of languages, did that one, did you comment on Bosnian Croats, did that one. Right, I'm going to turn to questions from the old entropy. Now, if we're about halfway through, so I'd just like to say, if you're new to the show, hello, welcome to Jolly Heretic. We are an online public house. We meet on Mondays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. UK time, currently 3 p.m. in New York, though the clocks will change in Britain, in Europe on the 28th of March, and therefore it will become 2 p.m. in New York, as it has always been. If you would please subscribe, it really helps if you do that. Please like it. Please press the bell button thing, and also subscribe on BitChute and Odyssey, where this will be placed when we finish. If you want to help the channel, you can do so through sending in super chats, which I will research and you will get answers to within a week most, either by the old entropy, which you see the link below, or by the old YouTube. And we are an online public house. Remember, press button, would you be so kind as to answer my super chat? I don't know if it got through. I've no idea. I want to check. I will answer it. I answer them, sir, in the order in which they're sent. And that's pretty much how it works. And I research them as well, so you don't just get some stupid answer. So, Sindo Legend, I have had a super chat from you. It's a long super chat. I will research it and I will answer it interfrastically. Remember, by the way, that you can also send offline super chats to Entropy, so you don't have to send them now. You can send a super chat any time, through, any ever, and I will of course eventually answer it. And if you want to help fund as well, that you can see links in the box below. And I normally put up a non-live video, whatever, a recorded video, once a week or so. Okay, the next question comes from Jack the Beast. And he says, oi, oi, no offence, Dutty, but I reckons you could lead a move, thus English, to Finland. I reckons you could do more than based science and establish the base community. You get me? Perhaps you me, or we could grab some English lads and come up north for you. Well, thank you very much, sir. Yes, I like the idea, Jack the Beast, of establishing a small English community in Finland. We did used to have a group called Oulun Saatu, which is Oulun civilized, it means, which is sort of Chapism thing here in northern Finland, but it didn't really take off. So, but we do have an English group here in Finland called Brits in Oulu. And we're based around a Nepalese restaurant in the city centre, which is the best restaurant in the world. It's a very colonial feel. It's very, very nice. So there is actually a British group. So if you're ever up here, then let me know, and we will set up a Brits in Oulu Brits in Oulu meeting in your honour. Okay, the next question comes from. Oh my God. Comes from the true Scotsman. He says, why are Ulstermen so uninventive compared to the Scots if they are largely descended from lowlanders and migrants tending to have higher IQs within race? And also, does average IQ figure for Scots measure ethnic Scots, or is our large ethnic Irish population included, diminishing our average? Right. First of all, the IQ data that I have seen for Scots includes people that, I mean, you've had Irish people migrating to Scotland for hundreds of years, and it includes those. Secondly, I would note that I'm not sure how much it would interfere with your average, because you're going to get the more intelligent Irish probably on average that are going to migrate, because migration is predicted by intelligence. Thirdly, I'm not sure I agree that the Ulster Scots are uncreative. I've not seen any study of it. You'd have to look at the size, the number of people that are Ulster Scots, and the per capita number of inventions. Certainly there are a number of very, very influential Ulster Scots in American history, most obviously Andrew Jackson. I mean, he's pretty important, and he was Ulster Scot. And I believe there are a number of others. So I'd have to. I've not seen it studied, but I'm not sure I would agree that the Ulster Scots are not particularly inventive. I'm not sure about that. I suppose one problem is that they've been in a sort of state of perpetual warfare for quite a long time, really, and that might make people sort of focusing on other things and thus less inventive, whereas Scotland has had complete peace for a very long time. So, until the evil government took over in Holyrood. So I'm not sure about that, but thank you for your question. Viking Skog says, the speech of a maiden should no man trust nor the words which a woman says, for their hearts were shaped on a whirling wheel and falsehood fixed in their breasts. Habermal. Well, yes, indeed, sir. I think we can all agree on that. A woman is the lesser man, and all thy passions unto mine are as moonlight unto sunlight, and as water unto wine, in the words of Alfred Lord Tennyson. Okay, and he's poet laureate, so you can't have a go at him. Okay, Diwali the Swift says, Ed, the IQ in Western Europe was 15 to 20 points higher in the early Victorian era. Any predictions about the rest of the world? Would the IQ in Western Europe be higher than the East Asians at that point? Also interested in how intelligent Africans were at that point. As you said, they were under worse dysgenics than whites at the moment. Thanks. Yeah, I think that it may well be the case. There's some dispute over this, but it may well be the case that we were more intelligent than East Asians at that point, yeah. Because they hadn't been subject to the kind of severe plagues that we have been subject to, Black Death to the same extent, things like that. So, and I don't think they've been subject to the same extreme degree of group selection that we've been subject to either. So I think it might well be the case that it's hard to prove, it's very hard to prove, but it might well be the case that we were more intelligent than them at the time. As for other countries, well, it would be very, very difficult to prove something like that. You could use ancient genomes without really telling you about ancient things. So I just think it would, I mean, you can speculate on it, but it would be very, very